I'm going to now move to Nick Firzli, who's the Director General of the World Pensions Council, to give us his remarks.
I don't want to bore you guys. I just want to throw a few ideas that I think are important, and some of them may have heard them before because I keep on repeating the same ideas. But just to make a long story short, I'm delighted to be here today with such a distinguished group of thought leaders and asset owners. You know, as they say in French and Latin, or I think it's a Greek proverb that became Latin and then French. You know, victory has many fathers, and I'm one of the two or three chaps who invented the expression infrastructure as a new asset class. And so that expression, which has become very banal today, infrastructure as a new asset class, was born 12, 13 years ago, somewhere between Paris, Houston, and New York. And we're a small group of, intellectuals trying to come up with what was already, people were doing it already. So what I want to say is here that some sophisticated Ontarian, Quebecois, Australian pension funds were already investing actually in infrastructure, but they were not using the expression infrastructure as an asset class, which we came up with two or three other guys 12, 13 years ago. And when we did so, I have to confess that we were faced with a lot of skepticism. So people didn't like the idea, and most experts found it really stupid. And so it took a lot of time for the idea to percolate, even though it existed for a long time, even before the term itself was invented. So I'm making this detour today just to say that, good ideas take time. So it takes a lot of time to preach in the desert and to make things happen. And of course, when we're dealing with emerging markets, with all due respect, the way some investors in the Northern Hemisphere view the developing world, or viewed, because perceptions are changing, but risk perceptions are important, because risk perceptions today, if you are the CIO of a large asset management company or pension fund in Edinburgh or Vancouver, they are a reflection to a large extent of the past, right? Because the financial statistical information is based on past and present data, right? And so risk perceptions regarding what was called not long ago, when I started working in finance, we called emerging markets not emerging markets. I was shocked, we called them LDCs, least developed markets or least developed countries. And so even emerging market itself is a reflection of an improved perception. So I'm saying all this because if I have something to say today, only one thing is that's how the world is. So this is how financial analysts, CIOs in the Northern Hemisphere, to a large extent, they view Africa, like it or not. So I think you have to take them as they are, and I think you have to invite them or entice them or encourage them to put more money in real assets in Africa based on their current worldview, right? And so there are many positive things that Africa has going, and one of them is the macroeconomic and demographic dynamism, which I think will make up for the collapse in the price of commodities and oil and gas. But I think that long-term trend about demographic, economic dynamism is there to stay in spite of the so-called Corona crisis. And I think it's good for real assets, and it's good for infrastructure and private equity and other non-listed assets. And another detour I would like to make today. So basically, I was delighted to be contacted by Hubert. I think he was in New York at the NASDAQ 4 or 5 years ago when he came up. He's very modest, but to a large extent, the 5% framework is the brainchild of Hubert Denso. And when he first talked to me about it, I think in New York 4 or 5 years ago, he wanted my input regarding the percentage, right? So I think why 5, not 7, not 3, not 2, and basically I really encourage him to go for 5 for many reasons that have to do with asset allocation, etc. So and I think it's a good figure. So I think it was an embryonic idea 3 or 4 years ago in New York, But I think now it has withstood the passage of time. And I think today, when people look at 5% domestic asset owners, infra Africa, it makes a lot of sense. It was a very ambitious figure 3-4 years ago, but I think now it's more real because, of course, the world evolved in the right direction. So what is the right direction? Is asset owners are putting more money in non-listed and real assets. That is the right direction. So that's really something that is good for infrastructure in Africa. So it's great. It's great, really, that African asset owners are leading by example in countries like Ghana and Nigeria and Kenya. I think it's really fantastic because it's really sending a very strong message to the rest of the world. And when we had the discussion with Hubert at New York like 4 or 5 years ago, not many pension funds on the continent were putting so much money, or not that many governments, and not that many policymakers or sovereign funds on the continent were doing it. And I think, fast forward today, what has happened is already fabulous and amazing. So, it's starting. So it's moving in the right direction. So of course, more of it needs to be done. But I think the fact that we have that, these pivots, to use a French word, these beachheads or pivots in countries like Ghana, like Kenya, like Nigeria, I think in itself is fabulous. And it's a very solid base. Now, what I would like to say is, now is the crisis, going forward, how can we attract more asset owners from the continent, but also from Asia, Australia, Singapore, North America, Northern Europe? How can we attract them more to co-invest, hopefully, with the African, domestic asset owners? So if I had to throw just a few ideas now, I think it would be very sexy to start working on the concept of a few regional and sectoral platforms or sub-platforms. So I think it would be great if in 6 months or 12 months, that can be the beginning of an offering saying, look, these supranational, these IFIs, supranationals, jointly with some large African development and sovereign and pension actors and the EU Commission and whatever the World Bank, all together, they're working on these West African infra platform or East African infra offering, and also with the same line of thinking, sectoral. So a Pan-African utility platform or a Pan-African renewable, slicing the infrastructure as in reach. So one more thing, and I think it's an issue dear to the heart of Hubert because he has asked me to speak about it earlier. It's the indices, the benchmarks that are forced upon pension funds and sovereign funds are highly biased because these benchmarks produced by an Anglo-American oligopoly of just 2 or 3 companies and are used by practically all pension investors and insurance companies and sovereign funds the world over, including in Africa. These benchmarks are highly biased in favor of listed assets using market cap as the golden standard. And these benchmarks are biased in favor of Northern European and US listed equities. Of course, that needs to change. And pension funds and insurance companies needs to be more courageous and themselves, and some are doing it already, but they need to do more of it. They need to break the shackles of these prefab indices and benchmarks. It doesn't mean stop investing into, US equity or fresh stock, but it means like, adopt your own tailored, modified benchmark that will allow you to invest in what? It's something that is more of a reflection of the real GDP. So if you move away from listed large cap equity into kind of tailor-made DIY benchmark that reflects current real GDP, but also future GDP, if you incorporate the pent-up economic growth because infrastructure investment needs economic growth and demographic growth. If you incorporate that, the future growth, into today's benchmark, the mere fact of reimagining or reassessing your benchmark will allow you automatically, mechanically, to free up more money for emerging market and African infrastructure. So that's my main message to you guys today.
Doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.